As you'll see on the slide, while we're waiting for others to join, please do feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, mention your role and where you're from, if you like, and please do use the chat. We're going to be using that for asking questions throughout. So I'm hoping this is going to be a really interactive session with lots of questions. I know I have lots of questions. We've got a couple of great speakers and they're going to be sparking lots of questions, I know, for all of you. So please do use the chat, say hi, and as questions occur to you, please also do ask those questions. So for those of you who are just joining us, I'll just reintroduce myself again. I'm Tris Lumley, Director of Innovation and Development at NPC. Delighted to welcome you to this event on innovations in governance. And thank you, Clothworkers Company, for supporting these events and being our partners. It's been a long relationship with the Clothworkers Company with events on governance. And so I'm delighted to chair this one today. I should remind you this is a public event. It is being recorded. You're free and encouraged to tweet about it if people indeed still do that. I was just saying to my colleagues, I'm not actually really using Twitter, or X as it's called these days, so much. But do also join us on LinkedIn and feel free to discuss anything that you're finding interesting in the event, or to reach out to me or my colleagues on LinkedIn. So we've got an hour today to hear from two fantastic speakers. You'll have a chance to hear from them and then to ask questions. We'll have a little Q&A after each speaker, and then we'll have some time for a more kind of open forum discussion and questions towards the end of the session. Please do get stuck in on the chat with your questions. So we will make sure that we're keeping a track of those, and we'll make sure that we get to your question. If we haven't got to it, feel free to flag that for us again. And I should also mention before we get cracking that there's another event, the next event in this series on governance with the Clothworkers Company, creating an effective board on January 25th. So please do join us for that as well. But before we do kick off, a little perspective on governance, and I'm sure my colleagues will be sharing guidance and other links to work that NPC has done on the subject. Governance has been something that I've been aware of as an incredibly important aspect of effectiveness in charities and in the charity sector since I came into the sector 20 years ago. Incredibly important, and I'm going to say difficult, from my experience of researching charities and understanding their effectiveness, from understanding the research that exists across the sector, and also from my personal experience of being a trustee, being part of charities boards, and working for a charity which is governed by a trustee board. I believe it's an incredibly difficult thing to get right. We rely on volunteers, which means that people aren't being paid for their contribution in the main, and they have to do an awful lot to make sure that they are engaged enough, that they understand enough of what the mission of an organization is, of the reality of the context in which that organization is operating, and alongside that, to be really clear on the role that they're supposed to take, that trustees are supposed to focus on strategy and not operations. They are supposed to provide oversight and scrutiny and challenge, but not get involved in doing the work. And that separation of roles is something that might be easy to describe, but I do not believe it's easy to achieve effectively in practice. So governance matters incredibly to all of us who care about charities, and I know we all do. There are lots of trustees, I'm sure, and just seeing the chat, there are people who are trustees If not, if you work for a charity, you have trustees. It matters so much to us that our governance functions effectively. And yet, yes, it's a difficult thing to do. So we're very interested in seeing models that combine what charities need to do to comply with the law in terms of trusteeship, but are also experimenting and doing things differently in order to get the governance right from their perspective. And that's something that I think, while you see examples, I don't think there's enough discussion out there about innovations in governance. And I don't think there's enough of a space for people who are interested in picking up on the experience of others to find out how they might do things differently as well. So it's great that we have this space today. As you know from my introduction, my role is about innovation, but innovation is not often a lens that I think we turn on governance. So I'm delighted that we're going to have a chance to explore a couple of fantastic examples of doing things differently today. And I hope that you will get stuck in, ask your questions, and also be inspired by what you hear, maybe challenged by some of what you hear, and come to think about how you may do things differently as well. Of course, you may have experience of running your governance differently from the norm. So as well as sharing your questions in the chat, as I said, if you want to post on Twitter or on LinkedIn about your experience, about how you're doing things differently as well, and if we want to sort of generate an ongoing conversation around this, then marvelous. But for the moment, it's my main job to do the first introduction. So I'm delighted that we are joined by Abby Woodman first. Abby is chair of East London Waterworks Park, a volunteer-led project seeking to transform a brownfield site into a thriving community resource and green space. And in her day job, as many of us who are trustees, we also have day jobs. So in her day job, Abby runs her own business in the educational publishing sector. So thank you so much, Abby. I'm delighted that you've joined us today. I'm going to hand over to you to tell us about your work and how you do governance differently.
Thank you so much. I'm just reading through some of all the people who are joining, and it's what an amazing group of people. So thank you for taking some time to listen to me for a little bit today. So I'm chair of East London Waterworks Park. If we just flick quickly onto slide 2, we're a volunteer-run charity, as Trish said, that wants to buy a 5.68 hectare plot of land in East London. That's the picture on the left. It's currently owned by central government, and we want to transform it into a brand new community-owned park with biodiverse habitats, wild swimming ponds, and community buildings that are all accessible to everyone for free. So our values, move on to slide 3. Our values are radically imaginative, at peace with nature, and courageously inclusive. And we started out as a handful of green spaces activists. And as we grew, we realised we needed a governance structure that enabled us to retain the camaraderie, joy, and creative responsiveness of a grassroots campaign, but also ensured we had the professionalism to register first as a charitable company and then as a charity. We needed a methodology that would give us joy, but also make us look like a serious organisation. And we chose sociocracy. And move on to my last slide, which I'll keep up for a while. So I think I noticed someone in the chat is already using a sociocratic form of governance. But for those that aren't aware of it, it's based on working groups that take responsibility for specific strands of work. So in our case, we have governance, design, communications, fundraising, inclusivity, and learning. And the working groups report into the hub. That's the main decision-making body of the organisation. And anyone who is present at a meeting, regardless of whether it's their first meeting or their 50th meeting, they can participate in making whatever decisions are before us at that moment in time. Decisions are generally made by consent, not consensus or majority, and there is consent if no one has a valid objection. So what generally happens is a proposal is presented to a meeting. Attendees discuss the proposal, what they like and perhaps what they don't like. Then the chair asks if there are any objections to the proposal. So those are things more than, well, I'm not really sure about this, or could we tweak that there? I've got a big concern about this. If there are objections, it's often possible for the chair or an attendee to propose a slightly altered proposal that does not meet with objections, or the people bringing the proposal take it away, work on it, and try to address and remove those objections. So this process, I think the benefit of it is that it allows a group of people to make decisions collectively and to actually make decisions. To give you an example, a designer had produced 2 logos for us. We had to choose from 2 logos. Making design decisions collectively is notoriously difficult, but by structuring the decision-making via a series of proposals. So I started with, I propose we make the decision tonight. We don't defer the decision, we actually make it. I propose we start by stating which logo we each prefer to take the temperature, then move to sharing what we like and don't like about each logo, then take the temperature again. Finally, I proposed that we move to a majority vote. So taking it step by step, it was possible to come to an agreement within the time frame that we'd allocated for the discussion and to make the decision. And everybody's voices were heard in that process. Now, I have been talking to people about this over the last few years, and I have heard criticisms of this method of decision-making, that it favours those who are articulate and verbally confident. But I suggest that's true of most other ways of making decisions too. And I think a strong chair can overcome some of the pitfalls by giving everyone a chance to speak if it feels appropriate. So sometimes going around the room and asking everyone if they'd like to share their thoughts on the subject. By carefully listening and by stewarding the discussion to give all viewpoints airtime, as well as making counter proposals at an appropriate moment to kind of shape and move the conversation forward. That does make the role of chair incredibly important and challenging. And I know from my own experience that it can be very tough to chair a meeting where you might have a very strong personal opinion that you need to kind of keep tamped down, or you aren't at your very best that day, or there are lots of different opinions flying around and you're finding it hard to find the pathway through. Nevertheless, I think we are making it work. And if any of you would like to see it in action, then you are really welcome to join one of our hub meetings. And I'll put a link in the chat in a moment. A link to where all our meetings take place, including hub meetings. And as I say, anyone is very welcome to come along and join us. To carry on with our story, though, once we had our structure and decision-making process in place, we had to think about how it fitted with the legal requirement to have trustees. So anyone can come along to our meetings to find out about our work, and they're a guest. If they get stuck in, they become a friend, and friends who demonstrate their ongoing commitment to the project can apply to become members. So that's the equivalent of shareholders in a charitable company. Members appoint the trustees from among their number, and all trustees participate in the governance circle. So this means that essentially the governance circle makes the decisions traditionally made by trustees, and the trustees then officially sign off on those decisions. It means that so far we've only needed the minimum number of trustees, so that's 3. So we can just end the slides and while I just carry on talking. 3 trustees has been working well for a while, but we're now looking ahead to the day when we own the land and have to raise somewhere in the region of 20 million from trusts and foundations to transform the site into our park. And we've been advised that from the outside, 3 trustees will not provide funders with adequate confidence that we've got a robust governance structure. So it would be lovely if funders were more flexible and were able to see beyond the headlines to our sort of more innovative way of doing things. But I think we have to be realistic. We need to meet their requirements. So what we've decided we need to do is expand our trustee board, but we have to do it in a way that honours our deeply participatory Sociocratic governance structure. So we've decided, and it's taken us quite a long time to talk through it, we've decided that additional trustees will be recruited in the same way as the existing trustees. So they will be members of the organisation involved in the day-to-day work of at least one circle and regularly attending hub meetings. And when they're at the board meetings, they'll simply wear a different hat. So we're clear about the strategic skills that we want members of the board to bring, and we want to recruit the new trustees carefully so that they've got those strategic skills, but they will be part of the organisation, sensitive to how it works and to decisions that have already been made. The strategic thinking will take place at board level, but ideas will flow to and from the circles as people are both active members of the organisation and participating in the board. So East London Waterworks Park was founded to create the world we want to live in. And so we've tried to develop a governance structure that allows us to do just that and still meet the legal requirements of trusteeship. So only time will tell how successful this model will be, but we have grown from strength to strength since we founded in 2019. And I'm confident we'll continue to flourish and we'll stop and reflect and reorganise ourselves if not. So that's me. Thank you very much for listening.
Fantastic. Thanks, Abby. It is a really interesting model, and I'd love to dig into that a little bit more. If people have questions, please do ask them in the chat. Otherwise, I get the fun of asking all the questions to Abby myself. So what's really clear is that you've got people who are really engaged in the organization's work, who are then involved in its governance, and that's fantastic. That gets past the separation and the distance and the lack of understanding that can sometimes exist. But I'm also intrigued, does it mean in those working groups, does people's personal experience of being engaged in the work then come into how those working groups are operating so much that you get conflict between the different working groups, or you get very sort of personalized viewpoints coming through in the governance? Or maybe you can just tell us a little bit more about how does that engagement play out?
So how do the different working groups relate to each other, I think is
well, yeah, I suppose I wondered if people have different experiences of being part of the work, do they then shape how the working groups are seeing things through those experiences? And then do you end up with essentially conflicts between different personal experiences?
I think that's where the role of the hub is absolutely critical. So things come to the hub to share and then cascade back out again. So the different circles do have very different flavors. They have very different people working on them, and they have very specific tasks to complete. I think it's called spheres of influence, really. And certainly there are different approaches, but because they come to the hub and areas of conflict can be discussed and unpacked in that space, we haven't actually had what I would call conflict so much as healthy discussion over issues. So for example, we might, the design circle might be exploring battery storage on the site. Would we want to have battery storage on the site? And they will mention at Hub that that's something that they're thinking about. And if people want to be involved in that discussion, then they can come and join the smaller group that's talking about that, and they will return to the Hub with a proposal in due course. We also use Slack as a method of communicating in public. And I think that's a really important part of sort of flat structured organizations, deeply participatory organizations. In a way, all the communication needs to take place in a space that everyone can see if they choose to. Now, Slack can be incredibly challenging. I'm sure anyone who's used it can know it can be incredibly challenging. Having a lot of messages is very hard to keep up with. And it's something that we're consciously aware that we want to do better at. Like, as a platform, it's not perfect, but it does mean that minutes are shared everywhere, conversations can flare up, and everyone can get involved in them. And I think that's one way to flag potential conflicts early while they can still be resolved in a tidy way.
Yeah, that makes sense. And certainly the working in the open is a really interesting aspect that maybe we'll come back to. Maybe also is the amount of work involved. Right, all of this takes longer than a quarterly board meeting to prep for, right? But there's value in it. There's huge value in it. So, okay, well, I'm sure there are going to be lots more questions coming in. If I'm not seeing any other questions, there are some practical questions about, actually maybe one about the composition of the hub. So maybe you could come back to this one, Abby. The questions being asked is, are the hub all trustees, or is there a risk that the regular participants of the hub become de facto trustees?
So anyone is welcome to the hub. Any member of any circle, any member of the organisation is welcome to the hub. The hub is not the trustee board. The trustee board sits above the hub. Currently, it is the governance circle. The trustees meet after the governance circle meetings. But in this new way, when we're looking to expand the trustees, we're going to meet in the traditional quarterly method. But we are nothing to do with that. The trustees, sorry, are nothing to do with that schematic that was on the screen. The trustees, in a sense, are bolted on to meet the legal requirements.
Yeah.
And what we're trying to do is make sure the information flows backwards and forwards between the trustees and the organisation as a whole, which, because the trustees are members of the organisation, can do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And now the questions are starting to come in. So we've got another question from Megan from The Catalyst. Hi, Megan. How long do you find it takes for people to become fluent in sociocracy, especially if they're used to other forms of governance?
I think people get quite excited about it because they're there from their very first meeting participating. I think that's a really valid question on how long it takes to really feel it and to really understand how it works. A little while, but it feels very natural once everyone around it is modelling you. We started off with this approach. I don't know how easy it would be to convert an organisation. I think I can notice someone there has said, can you do it with paid staff? I think you probably can, but you need to be careful then about your hierarchy. So that chair has to be a facilitator as opposed to, at the end of the day, I'm going to be making those decisions.
Yeah, and so the chair role is, you've talked about the importance of the chair a number of times. Do you think you're more reliant on a chair than a traditional trustee board might be?
So each circle has a chair and the hub has a chair. And so, yes, the role of chair is incredibly important in the organisation. The chair of the charity, which happens to be me at the moment, is simply chair of the governance circle and chair of the hub. So I think probably that skill set of chairing meetings is critical to the way it flows.
Yeah, but from what I understand of sociocracy in general, and indeed democracy and deliberative debate and all of these things, it is an incredibly important skill set, and it's maybe something that if we were teaching more would benefit all of us as a society. So maybe it's not a bad thing to be reliant on that skill in this model.
And I will just say, responding to one of the questions, we have most of our meetings online on Zoom. So we formed towards the end of 2019 and really grew as an organisation throughout the pandemic. And so we still do quite a lot on Zoom. And I think it is potentially easier to chair a sociocratic discussion on Zoom because you can see everybody, people can put their hands up, you can move around people and call on people in an easier way than you can perhaps in a room. I think that's been quite a learning curve.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've been fascinated since the pandemic and these sorts of forums with whether they are a good leveler and actually whether you can use them to manage power dynamics more. Megan's just brought up power in sociocracy as well, so lots more to come back to. But in the interest of time, I'm going to, Abby, maybe you'd like to sort of answer some of the specific questions in the chat. But thank you so much for sharing your experience and your perspective. For now, we're going to move on to our second speaker. And then same thing, we'll have a chance for Q&A with Seth, and then we'll come to a discussion with both Seth and Abby. So hi, Seth. I'm delighted to introduce Seth Scafe-Smith. Seth is a trustee of Theatrum Mundi, a centre for research and experimentation in the cultural life of cities. He's also a director at Resolve Collective, an interdisciplinary design collective that combines architecture, engineering, technology, and art to address social challenges. And he has a background in area regeneration and public infrastructure in the private and public sectors. So I am delighted to hand over to you, Seth,
Hi.
to tell us about your approach to doing governance differently.
Cool. Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. Hopefully you guys can hear me okay. And if there's some background pop music in the back, that's because I'm in a storage unit for one of my projects. So hopefully it's not too loud. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Can people see? Can people see my screen? Yes. Okay. And then if I go to full screen, how is that? Triz, I'm looking at you because I can see your face.
It's not gone full screen yet. We've also got the slides here if it's easier for us to share.
Oh, that's weird. I've oh, okay. Sorry. Let me try again. How about now?
Looks good. Perfect.
Yeah, so thanks for having me. I mean, this is a really interesting opportunity for me and the first kind of time that I'm speaking in this type of forum. And I guess what you'll find with us is that we're very much an organization in transition. So I'm kind of here on behalf of Theatr Mundi, but the role that I play in my other organizations is also similarly important. And I think that there's a bit of a crossover and a kind of cross-pollination between the two, and that's affected how we then govern the organization. So Tris explained very well that Resolve Collective, which is the organization that I run on a day-to-day, is an interdisciplinary design collective. We work with a kind of method or practice method that we call using the site as a resource. So that's thinking locally, thinking about local materials, local spaces. We have a kind of interventive element to us. So we build a lot of things. We use a lot of materials. We kind of participate in conversations around circularity, around working closely with communities and thinking about how we can kind of co-design some of these solutions. And it's a very process-led organization. So the whole kind of framework is around working quite closely with communities to address social issues through design, but also through a number of different disciplines. So then taking me to Theatr Mundi. Theatr Mundi is, again, as Tris said, it's a kind of a research group / think tank, and we look at a kind of interdisciplinary framework to investigate urban environments, to investigate cities. We've been operating for about 10 years now, and we were founded outside of, also we were founded within LSE cities by Richard Sennett and Adam Kasser. And then we evolved into a charity so that we could continue to deliver the kind of work that we wanted to deliver, but outside of the kind of guidance and framework that was set by a university. And that's when we started to enter these conversations about the kind of governance of a charity, and maybe kind of develop our own journey, not a kind of quite a tangential journey to where we are now. So what we do is we offer a space for dialogue, we offer a space for thinking. We are now a space for kind of programming. So we have a lot of programmatic focus within our organization. We particularly want to engage in kind of knowledge exchange and experimental thinking with an avenue and an angle of social justice and spatial and environmental justice. The mission is to think about democratizing and diversifying. So we're really interested in kind of access and agency and who has access to some of these decisions that affect all of our communities across the world, and democratizing the kind of access to resources and the educational platforms that people from within the industry, but also then outside of the industry, and particularly from these underrepresented groups can access. How we do it, so I've kind of already touched a little bit on some of our methods. So we have quite a kind of strong and mature research arm. So we are right the way throughout our life, we've been pretty used to the idea of producing research, inviting writers and thinkers to contribute to quite interesting thought pieces. That has kind of helped us grow a network or an ecology of artists and activists and urbanists and students and all kinds of people who kind of work in and around the area that we're working in. And actually, I myself, I'm part of that ecology. So the way that I started to work with Theatr Mundi is because as a practice, or with my practice hat on, we engage in them in quite a critical way. So we've done some collaborations on projects before. We've kind of they were quite an influential space in the development of my own practice and a lot of the practices of my peers around the same generation. So it kind of made sense for me to get involved or to try and help out. And then that takes us on to governance, right? So we, again, are a kind of organization in transition, and unlike Abby, we haven't, I wouldn't say that we've got a model that we have sussed out and that we're ready to kind of talk about in all its glory. But what we do have is an opportunity to test some things. So during this transition, a lot of the old leaders within the organization moved on, and a lot of the newer leaders within the organization or people within the organization are now kind of responsible for managing it. So that's right the way through. So it goes from at board level, we've got three of us, myself, Chloe Spibilo and Stephanie, and we're all a kind of similar level, a similar kind of place in our career. And we're also quite deeply involved in the kind of work that Theatr Mundi does. Not to say that we're directly involved, but we're quite deeply involved in the kind of work on the landscape. The team then is a little bit smaller. So we have three of us in the team. And then we've also got an advisory board who we meet with semi-regularly. And again, those are people that some I know very well and others I don't know so well, but people that we've all developed our practices together. We've all got a kind of stake in how Theatr Mundi works, the kind of information, the kind of knowledge that Theatr Mundi shares. And actually, it's been really, really important and really useful for us to kind of bounce off ideas with that advisory group. But what we know now, as we're kind of entering a new phase of our life, so we continue to deliver programs, we continue to deliver research papers, and we continue to publish articles about our kind of thought pieces. But as we enter this new phase of work, we have an opportunity to think about how our organization can be governed by people who are closer to the spaces that we navigate. And using some of the experience that we've had over the last 2 years, where the three people that you can see there have been kind of front and center of governance within the organization. So we have a good opportunity to take some of the things that we've learned from this example. So take some of the things that we think have worked with the kind of proximity and actually slightly non-hierarchical structure, in the sense that the organization is lateral, the board is quite lateral, and we try and work together to solve problems. How we can take some of those positives and then also improve in spaces as well. So knowing where there are some gaps that we need to fill, knowing where there are some bits of experience that we need to gain in certain places. So for example, like Abby, we had a similar conversation with a funder who said that actually you need to add some experience in your board and in your organization in certain places. And we're very well aware of that. But what we are also aware of is that we would like to do it in a way that closes the distance between those who are responsible for the organization or responsible for the strategic direction of the organization and those who are responsible for delivering the day-to-day. And because we actually, that proximity that we've had to experience, and sometimes it's because of challenges that we've gone through as an organization, but that proximity that we've had to experience has been really, really beneficial. I think it's meant that people can really step forward and show how they would like to help the organization in a traditional way, but also in a non-traditional way as well. And then just to conclude, this is a wonderful team. It's taken a slight change in that we have 5 people now, but this is just some faces to leave you all with. And that's me.
Fantastic. Thanks, Seth. Fantastic to hear. And while there may be questions coming out on the chat, I want to dig into to kick that off. So you talked about the importance of proximity and of your governance being of you being people who are part of the practice, who are not distant from the practice, and that resonates a huge amount. When I think about that as learned experience, as your proximity as practitioners, as being part of understanding the fabric of what's going on. So I entirely get that. So a couple of questions. Do you think there's a downside to that proximity? Have you seen that come out? I mean, you've talked about needing some other skills on the board. Maybe that's finance or legal or whatever. I think that's a bit separate. But is there a downside to proximity? And then I suppose the other side of that is there's a huge discussion about the importance of lived experience and people people and communities and those who are supposed to benefit from the work of charities being part of organisations. So do you feel that you have that kind of proximity as well as the kind of practitioner version of that?
Yeah, I mean, good questions. I'll answer the last first, because I think that we definitely have representation from people with lived experience of the old world that we navigated. So when Theatr Mundi was quite deeply connected to universities, as you can imagine, people who were going through those kind of spaces, starting their own practice, it was very focused on that kind of nurturing young practice, and nurturing a group of creative urbanists and people from backgrounds like myself. So actually, we do have now a composition that I would say probably reflects people with the lived experience of those who the charity wanted to affect maybe 5 years ago. Now we actually need to think about, because we're trying to become a little bit more public facing and step out of the kind of the protection that you get within a discipline. So not just to be able to speak and work with, you know, artists, architects, creatives, but also to work with community members who experience on a day-to-day the kind of things that we are talking and thinking about, which is similar to what I do in my organization. That is where we need to get more representation for sure. I think that's something that we'd be really interested in doing. And our latest program, based in Croydon, has kind of it has I can't think of the word. And people have come through that program who look like they'd be really interested to work with on a kind of governance perspective, because they're quite deeply connected with it. But and then the first question, the challenges. Yeah, I mean, I guess it's also interesting because we've had a lot of challenges as an organization. So we've been kind of wading through quite a challenging time. But I think there are always going to be those challenges, because you need to make sure that you give the team the space and the responsibility to kind of do their role. And we also need to be able to quite clearly define, because of some of the things that you said originally, which is like, you know, we're not getting paid for this work. A lot of us will have a lot of things to say about it if it was an organization that was paying our salary and that we had founded. But you have to make sure that you create divisions, and you can agree on divisions. So you can agree when it's appropriate to say, you as the team, as the operational team, this is for you guys to do. This is for you guys to be able to decide and explore on your own. And then we're here, and we should be able to say that we're going to stand back a little bit. And I think we've had to navigate those moments, and sometimes it's you have to kind of enforce those. Yeah,
that's interesting. So you have enough proximity to understand what the team are going through, and to really feel the fabric of that. But you have to ensure that you create the separation, or your role and they know their role. But maybe you don't entirely rely on just the label trustee kind of being enough to do that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think what we'll do, and unless there are particular questions, I did see a question earlier about the organisation's funding, but maybe that's something we can come to in the sort of opening up the joint conversation. So yeah, what I'm going to suggest that we do is to now open it up and make it questions to Seth and Abby together. And feel free, I'm seeing quite a lively conversation in the chat where people are talking to each other about their own experiences as well. So please do carry on doing that. But because my ability to multitask is very, very limited, I really can't keep track of all of that at the same time. So to kick off the discussion, I just wanted to bring money into the room, as someone had mentioned in funding already. But my experience has been that the challenge for trustees, the challenge for boards in being able to keep focused on the mission that the organisation had in the first place, rather than the funding of the organisation as it is now, is just an incredibly difficult challenge. And so I'm fascinated by whether these alternative models are helping to keep a focus on mission, rather than organisation, and in us just sort of talking a little bit about when money comes into the room and how that works within the different structures. So Abby, maybe I can turn to you first. How's the organisation's funding and resources? How does that interact with the sociocracy structures?
So we've been entirely crowdfunded to date. So initially we started off with just all of us putting in a little bit of money, and then we raised 30,000 through a first crowdfunder, and then 500,000 towards buying the site in a second one. So we feel very responsible for that money. It comes from our community, given to our community, and so we try to do as much as possible on the fly without spending much money, and we spend it where we think it's important. So we're doing a listening project to reach out to our community, and it's important that we compensate people for talking to us. So that's where some of that money is going. But we try to operate without thinking about the money, as it were. It's absolutely essential, as you say, but a lot of what we're doing is imagining things into being. So it's quite conceptual. And so what we're really raising money for is to buy the land, which is a little bit separate. So I think it's quite easy for us to stay focused on our mission, because our mission is convince the government to sell us this plot of land and make sure we've got enough money to pay for it when they do.
Yeah. And interesting, and because the money has been raised through crowdfunding, that is entirely coherent with and consistent with the governance model that you have in place. Yeah, I guess until, sorry to cut you out. I was just thinking, if you had a very significant donation from a particular individual who was then very involved in the sociocracy, could that bias things? But I guess that's not a situation you've had to deal with.
We have had one or two people who've made incredibly generous donations during the crowdfunder, and some of us know who those people are and some of us don't, and so I think that's quite important, that that perhaps some of those big donations aren't always ultra public, but I think because our way of making decisions allows everybody's voices, those voices couldn't be any louder than anyone else's because they'd put more money in it. It just doesn't really work like that. If it doesn't work, that somebody who's, I don't think it would. I mean, it's a thing we need to be aware of. And one of the things we didn't want to do, we were talking at one point about expanding the trustee board by reaching out to high value donors who would donate and then perhaps have a representative on the board. And we did lean away from that because we were worried that it would give one individual or two individuals too big a voice.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And Seth, you mentioned at the beginning some of the funding of the organisation and how you moved away from some of the initial structures and founders and so on. But how are you navigating money within your governance?
It's certainly a challenge. I think that because we were previously dependent on philanthropic donation, and that was very much, as we all know, is a kind of very network driven and elitist model and kind of pool of resources to access. Now that we're, I think, being much more brave in our commitments to communities and to people who are outside of those circles, right? So we talked when I was presenting, I talked a lot about things like accessibility, democratization, marginalized groups, right? And now that our governance is kind of getting toward, or at least aiming to be reflective of some of those aspirations, both in terms of the professional experience and the situation of the people. We're talking about, it means that those people, you shift the resources that they come with and the connections that they come with and the kind of inherent or kind of embedded resource that those people bring. It's not to say that the people who we have and the spaces that we are now more familiar with are irrelevant, because in that shift we also had to start to look toward foundations and kind of public funding, of which I myself and a few others have had to navigate in other capacities, and you can come with existing relationships, but I think I know that they're of lower value financially, but they might be more around supporting developmental points. So if you're now that we're thinking about an organization that's trying to go through a transition, and if we think about the kind of resources that we have at our disposal, there's a lot of funders who are interested in supporting the kind of development of an organization, supporting the kind of testing a program for a few years, rather than giving you a lump sum of however much money that you might get in a philanthropic donation. So it's kind of having to be able to be willing to pivot. And yeah, it's not without its challenges, of course. It is very, very difficult, but I think it can, again, it means that the conversations that we're having as well are like, we're trying to put ourselves in positions where we can learn from others, and we can make connections in some of the spaces that we found useful for our own development. So again, it just feels like that the conversation around money is a lot less how is the money? Oh, have we run out of money? Should we go and ask some rich friends where the money is and if they can add some more? And it's more about, well, we know that there are these, groups of people and practitioners who are interested in supporting organizations similar to us. Is our mission aligned to them? Yes, it is. Let's see if we can kind of have a startup conversation and they can give us some advice, and we can see if we can, those kinds of conversations.
Yeah, which come out of the focus on the mission, if I'm hearing you right, the focus on the mission comes from the proximity in a way, because you're always in the content, you're always looking at, what you should be doing and what you should be focused on, and looking for the opportunities that the money then comes out of attached to that, which
exactly. And I think that the capabilities point is around when that comes, how are we managing it effectively and making sure that it's committed to what we want it to be committed to, rather than necessarily saying we need to have a finance person because they've got loads of people with money, which it's tempting, right?
Yes, indeed. As someone who leads the fundraising for our organisation, I have certainly heard conversations that are in that kind of territory. We just find the rich person, regardless of their ideas. There's a nice comment. Thank you, Charlotte, saying that in her experience, when you work for purpose, the money will follow, but when you work for money, purpose can get lost. Which I think is a shorthand for a lot of what we're talking about. I think people joining this meeting, I know they are interested, because I've seen some of the questions where people are asking about it, but I think people are interested in transitions from one model of governance to another, which, granted, Abby, you set up with one model, so maybe you can't comment as much on that. But for both of you as well, on the links between the trusteeship model that you have to have for charity commission compliance and what you're trying to do through your governance differently. So I suppose a question from me, do you think you have any sort of practical hints or tips on where you're finding that those links work best? Or if you're a charity with an existing trustee board and you're thinking about branching out into something different, where some of those links come in, or how you might get started in thinking about that? Because I know that there are lots of people who are sort of interested in this conversation and thinking about, all right, what next? What might we do next? General question, but love to hear your thoughts.
Do you mind if I go first? I think talk. I think talk about it, explore the ideas and explore the difficulties of the ideas as well as the positives of the ideas, and just keep talking, because I am constantly amazed at how people come together if they keep teasing away at a problem. So I think if both parties are on board, so if the kind of officers are on board and the trustees are on board, then just start talking about it, but create a space where people can raise their concerns in a non-threatening, non-hierarchical space, and just kind of explore the ideas. Because although we took a model of sociocracy, I think we've made it our own. We've talked, and if things haven't worked or things need to change as we've grown, we've just said, what are we going to do and how are we going to do it? And we've tried to find a way forward. And I know we'll change again as we grow and change.
Yeah. So talk it out and get it out there. Seth, thoughts about how you are thinking about this sort of transitional time, right?
Yeah, I think like coaching and guidance is really important, and we could have spent a bit more time thinking about the value of a transition and allowing people from a kind of who are interested to learn and very close to the work to learn about the role and kind of, you know, share a bit of responsibility. I think that and this is again from my observation, is like the traditional form of governance, everything is very quick. So it's like these people barely have time for an hour meeting every month, and if they do, they might be in a couple of different countries. So the budget goes to the person who you trust with the budget. They come back around, feedback. This goes to someone who you trust with that. It comes back, it feeds back, and everyone just says, yeah, cool. Whereas I think that, you know, spending a little bit more time, just a tiny bit more time on kind of, you know, coaching within that trustee model, I think will make a transition much more effective, because there are some bits that can be technically quite challenging, but all of it's not that hard, is it? It's not like a rocket science. It actually, with a bit of guidance, I think that people who have no experience in these spaces can really come into their own. It's just that it seems really intimidating from the outside for someone who's never had to have a conversation about the direction of an organization. But that doesn't mean that they're not going to come with something valuable with a bit of like, you know, and I'm talking like a year spending some time with someone just to get them up to speed.
I think that's really interesting. There's a sense of like it's a really complex thing to do, to be a trustee. It's really difficult, and it's time consuming. You need to do it well, and you need to engage with it. But it's not. I think it's something that everyone can get involved in and flourish. And I think organisations flourish the more people who do get involved, and not just the usual suspects.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I introduced the subject by saying it's really difficult, and I think it is difficult to get right, but that doesn't mean that it's complex or technical, does it? And yeah, just hearing you both speak makes me think that just opening things up and asking questions is a great way. One question I did see come up on the chat is, what do the staff teams think of this? What are the officers, what are the people doing the work think of this? Is it working as far as they're concerned? I'd love to hear.
We don't have any staff, so we're all volunteers. We're all bought in right from the beginning, so that's easy for me to answer.
And so all of the volunteers think, I guess all of the volunteers can be as involved in the sociocracy as they. So yeah, there is no separation. How about with Theatr Mundi, sir?
Without speaking too much on their part, I think they were quite relieved, even though we were going through a very stressful period. But we were. I think that it has been really helpful for some of the people in the team to just be able to like pick up the phone, not on a day that's like, you know, to do with trustees, and just talk through a kind of a question that might seem a bit silly. Like we did have a really hierarchical model before, and I think that now it's not to say that this is everything is rosy, but I think that everyone is a little bit more is more kind of comfortable, because we're able to admit, oh yeah, you know what, actually I didn't know that, I missed that, without feeling like you're going to get kind of, you know, scolded by a group of people who are kind of, yeah, who have that like quite intimidating relationship. I think the previous one. So they're glad, and we're trying, like that's the main thing, and you can show that you are a bit more honestly.
Yeah. Yeah, I have to say I'm really I hope everyone is inspired by your examples and thinking lots about what they might do. But I am. It's kind of reminded me that I suppose what's in my mind is that, yeah, governance seems to impose a lot of constraints, but I think actually a lot of them are imagined constraints, aren't they? And so you're in your different ways. And I guess it helps that both of your organizations are about imagination and about creativity and creating new spaces in some ways. But what I love is that you're kind of taking what might appear to be constraints and then asking what really are. And you're taking the time to look at those things, you're opening up discussion around them. And so you're finding that actually there are very few constraints, and where there are some around charitable status, that that they can be managed by incorporating what you're trying to put front and center in your approach to governance, ahead of the formulaic stuff that you have to do to tick a box in a piece of paper. Not to belittle the role of charity regulation, which I seem to have just done. So yeah, I have to say that's been really sort of clarifying for me. And I hope it's my job to try and pull things together in the last couple of minutes. I'm sure we've had a few of the questions that have come out from people. There will be lots more on reflection. So if people do want to, I used to say just reach out on Twitter and continue the conversation on Twitter. And some people may still be on Twitter, and so that's fine. But if people want to reach out to us at NPC, or I don't want to volunteer, Abby, Seth, if people are interested in continuing conversations, but maybe they can pick up with you as well, ? And I guess discuss with each other, because people who have experience of these things. Megan, thank you for sharing. I did see a link to the blog that you shared about your experience of sociocracy. So please do continue to share examples, others, because it's really valuable and inspiring when people do. So yeah, I found that incredibly helpful, and I want to thank Seth and Abby. Thank you so much for sharing your experience and sharing that in such an open and generative way. I found that really helpful. I need to thank the Clothworkers company for partnership on this series of events on governance, and for creating the space where some of us can talk about this. As I said at the beginning, the next event is on January the 25th, creating an effective board, which I hope we will be doing with a view of all of the interesting insights coming out of this on how we don't necessarily have to follow the most traditional approach to that. So please do get involved in that, and please do complete the feedback survey, which hopefully a link is being shared on in the chat to a feedback survey. We're NPC, so we care lots about data, but it's also really, really useful to us to know what could we do better, and what might have improved this event, or what was really good about it. So I think that's everything that I need to do. That was a really fantastic event from my perspective. I've found lots of value. I'm being asked about, there's the survey just there before it closes, so click on that quickly. I'm sure we'll make that available afterwards if you haven't had a chance. But yeah, in the meantime, thank you everyone for coming. Thanks for getting involved in the discussion. Thanks again, Abby and Seth. And good luck to all of you who are trying to do governance differently. I hope you have tremendous success in future.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.